Kristen Carlton, and I am here with Annie Tulkin from Accessible College. We are going to talk all things college and disability and all the things you should be doing to plan for that, think about that, answer questions. So, Annie, you want to go ahead and give people a little background on who you are?
Sure. I'm Annie Tulkin. I am the CEO of Accessible College. At Accessible College, I provide college transition support and preparation for students with physical disabilities. So it might be a student who uses a wheelchair or a mobility device or is ambulatory and sometimes uses a wheelchair or mobility device. Students with chronic health conditions, which is another big tent term and sort of ranges. Um, along a whole different spectrum of things. Could be Crohn's disease, diabetes, POTS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, epilepsy, basically anything that might impact a student's ability to engage in college life. And I got into this work because I used to be the associate director of the Disability Support Office at Georgetown University, where I worked with undergraduate, graduate, and medical school students, supporting students in identifying reasonable accommodations and then helping them think through their needs. And one of the things that was really clear in that position was that so many students were going to college but had no idea how to request accommodations, hadn't really thought through continuity of care, personal care needs, independent living. And so I started Accessible College to address that gap. And I've been doing this now for several years. So I work with students across the country. And I have partnerships with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, and I work with the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the Perkins School for the Blind. So lots of things to talk about and share today, Kristen, as we engage in this conversation about disability and financial planning and all the, dotting your I's and crossing your T's. So I'm glad we're connecting.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm Kristen Carlton. I'm the CEO of All Needs Planning. And we do planning across the lifespan. And so, where Annie is very honed in on that particular area, which is why I'm so excited for this conversation about college, we're really looking across the board at it. But what I do find is that clients who have students with disabilities often they're waiting too long to get their accommodations in place or assuming that it will be available for them right when they ask for it, which is not always the case. So I thought maybe we could start our conversation there today, Annie, which is like, when should you start planning?
The joke that I was about to tell was like when the student's in kindergarten. But the real answer is as soon as possible, right? So the earlier the better. And part of it is just wrapping your head around, as a parent or as a student or guardian or whoever you are and however you're interacting with these students, a school counselor even. Um, what are the student's needs? What is going to change when the student considers college or just general post-secondary education, right? Whether that's a four-year university, a community college, a vocational training program, even a job, right? So, like, what are the things that we need to start thinking about? And how can we start thinking about skill development and identifying what a student might need early on? Part of the change, I think, Kristen, that a lot of families sort of undergo in the aha moment is that the laws change from high school to college. So, high schools, the K through 12 setting, is governed under accommodations and services are governed under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that is applicable at all public schools in the United States. And IDEA gives a student an IEP, an individualized education program. So they might have accommodations. They might also have services like a paraeducator, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, orientation and mobility. There's a wide variety of things that a student might get. The other sort of law that layers on top is Section 504, and that's the Rehabilitation Act that provides equal access for students with disabilities to education. And that's where students might have a 504 plan. So if your student has an IEP or a 504 plan, those are applicable to the K through 12 setting. They do not follow a student to college. And sometimes even my friends on the high school side don't really understand that. They think, oh, a 504 goes to college because that law applies to college. Yes, that law applies to college, but it's a different subsection of the law that applies to colleges. So the plan itself does not transfer directly to a college, just like an IEP does not transfer directly to a college because the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and right now in July when we're recording this, it's the 35th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act coming up on July 26th. Um, and so the ADA provides for reasonable accommodations, and I'm doing air quotes because what is reasonable varies based on the context, the program that the student is interested in, the skills that they might have to have. If they're in a vocational program and they have to be able to lift, 200 pounds because they're going to be installing HVACs or something like that, like that is something that HVAC techs have to be able to do. And so there are technical standards in different jobs that even students with disabilities would have to meet those technical standards. And so it's really important that students and families start thinking about what are the things that we need to work on, whether it's independent living skills, time management, keeping a calendar, executive function skills, because when a student transitions to college, it's all on them.
Mm,
They have to do all the things, right? So they have to connect with the disability support office. They have to have conversations with their professors. They have to be fantastic self-advocates. So starting as early as possible to think about those things is going to be really important.
mhm,
And for a lot of students who have personal care needs and maybe need a personal care attendant, they might need some different levels of support too. So starting to think early about who's helping a student now in the home? How are they getting ready for school? What are those steps that we're taking? And then how can we empower the student to start thinking about how they're directing someone else who might be doing that, in the future?
mm,
And that's hard. And it's all hard and it's all work, right? And we're
yep.
all busy parents. And so I often joke like, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. So the earlier you start, the better off you'll be. That's my MO.
Absolutely.
What do you think, Kristen?
Oh, one of the things that really jumped out at me is self-advocacy because so often think about any child, right? They're used to their parents advocating for them, making decisions for them. They're used to it. When you have someone with a disability, they're used to that whole IEP team plus the teacher, people who are making things happen for them and on their behalf. And then they go to college and they're expected immediately to be the most amazing self-advocates. And so I would say that skill and honing that skill with them, and then also teaching them to recognize when they need help and to recognize it early before it's a crisis. Because by the time it's become a crisis in college, it's usually too late. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you have not been able to go to class and all of a sudden it's the day of the final, and now you're saying, "Hey, I'm in crisis because I haven't been able to go to class all semester because it wasn't accessible," it's too late.
Yeah. The toothpaste is out of the tube, is what I like to say, and you can't put it back in. And you're so right. I actually have an online course called Preparing Students with Physical Disabilities and Health Conditions for College. And if folks go to my website, which is accessiblecollege.com, they can find information on the course there. But the course is really great in helping, educators, parents, healthcare providers, even students understand what the laws are, how they change from high school to college, and then how to think about their needs, right? So thinking about the accommodation pieces, which become more robust usually in the college setting too, because we might be talking about housing and dining and recreation and a whole gamut of things that weren't really relevant to accommodations in high school. And then also thinking about the continuity of care pieces, right? So like does your student know who their doctors are? Do they know how to contact them? Can they refill their own prescriptions? Like, how are we starting to build those skills so that students are really prepared and ready for quote unquote adulthood or adulthood light or transitioning into adulthood? And they don't get a lot of that care in high school. That's not typically something that school counselors are supporting students and thinking through. So it really does fall to students and families to think through those needs more critically and holistically.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
So yeah. So I have a question for you though,
Sure.
because like this is something that comes up for me a lot with all of my students. A lot of people find me like junior year of high school. because that's when students start to really tune in to the whole thing, and that's when their school counselors are like, "Oh, you need to start working on all these pieces." But I have a lot of students who have, chronic health conditions, physical disabilities, and they might also be eligible um, for ABLE accounts or 529, or they might have a 529 account already that, someone set up for a college savings account. And a question that they ask me all the time, and I refer them out to financial advisors, is like, what's best for my student? Let's just say like the student has a physical disability. They have spinal muscular atrophy type 2. They use a wheelchair. They need personal care attendants. Oftentimes people ask me like, okay, grandma and grandpa set up a 529. The kid is 16 now. Should I roll it over into an ABLE account? So Kristen, what's an ABLE account and what should people know about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, ABLE was established by legislation called a Better Life Experience, and it is to allow people with disabilities through the end of this year, they have to have been diagnosed before age 26. And starting in January of 2026, it'll be age 46. So, you have to be diagnosed before age 46 starting in January. And it really allows you to have more than $2,000 in an account in your name as long as it's in that ABLE account without interfering with your government benefits eligibility.
Mm.
It's run by the state's 529 programs. So you'll see a lot of times it's notated as a 529A account. That 529A says that it's an ABLE account. And it has some of the same characteristics in that you put in after tax money in there, but then it grows on a tax deferred basis. But then if you use it for any disability related expense, which can include education, it you don't have to pay tax when you use it.
Hmm.
So in general, an ABLE account can be a lot more flexible than a 529. That being said, you could have both. You could have a student who has both. I have parents who come and they're like, "Well, I have a 529 account in their name," and they're panicked. Like, "Oh my gosh, they're going to be kicked off their Medicaid waiver tomorrow." Well, no. If the 529 has their name on it, but it's not actually owned by the student, you're okay.
Hmm.
Normally, you'll have another adult who owns the account, right? A
Hmm.
parent or a grandparent, aunt or uncle, someone else. Um, as long as it's in the 529, you have some choices. You could actually transfer that money to another 529 account for a sibling for their benefit. You could use it in that 529 account to pay for tuition, room and board, books, college related expenses. You can use it for technical school now. They're really broadening the ways that you can use 529 accounts. But of
Hmm.
course, it's not as broad as that ABLE account because that ABLE account could be used for education, it could be for housing, it could be for, any expense related to that disability, medical
Yeah.
expenses.
To pay for personal care attendance, to buy an accessible vehicle, yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
I know, like we mentioned too, we said, you said, and I probably said it too, federal benefits, right? So it's a lot of the students that I work with, as they are turning 18, they are becoming eligible at age 18 for supplemental security income, SSI,
Yep.
to give them a base level of income each month. Many students actually choose to become SSI eligible because then they also become Medicaid eligible if they hadn't been Medicaid, if they hadn't done the whole Medicaid thing
Yep.
before, which has some benefits sometimes for students. But if you have a 529 account, this is a question I get all the time. If you have a 529 account that has the student's name attached to it, so if grandma's the owner, but the student's name is on it, will that work against them when they go to apply for SSI?
No, as long as grandma's the owner.
Okay. So the key is the student is not the owner of the account because there's a lot of other stipulations which Kristen can probably guide you and your families through when you're applying for SSI. The student cannot have a lot of funds to their name, more than $2,000. Is that correct,
Correct.
Kristen? Yeah.
$2,000. Really pushing for that to make it to $10,000, but hasn't happened.
I mean, we can dream, right? So that could be really valuable information too. And is that something you like guide families and thinking through and talking about? How does that work for with the clients that you have?
So we work with clients in a couple of different ways. We're actually launching a course later this year. We also do plans where we can work with you on a fee basis and develop a plan for your family, address the stage that you're at, which if you have a child preparing for college, we'd obviously be addressing that in depth. And then we have clients who hire us as their financial advisors and look for ongoing advice where we're addressing every stage as it comes up in a really proactive way.
Hmm.
But those are, as you mentioned, there's like 1,000 little details just in one thing, like applying for supplemental security income that have to be taken into account.
Yeah. There are so many moving parts, right? And sometimes, if a family can do it, it really benefits them to either, get educated on the topic as best they can or to get assistance figuring it all out, right? Because none of us are experts on everything, right? Like even me, I'm learning things as I'm talking to you about the financial aspects because you're the expert on that. I might know a lot more about college accommodations, but um, and that's where I excel. Are there other benefits too that like students with disabilities might be eligible for besides SSI?
Well, there's certainly Medicaid waivers, and those Medicaid waivers would be done through your state. Usually your local it could be called a community services board or something else, depending on what your locality does. But these are home and community-based services that go beyond just traditional medical care. They could provide those personal care attendants, could provide with transportation, not college specific, but certainly if the student is go attending college, it would be integrated into their daily lives.
Hmm. And here's where I can come in and sort of provide some detail too on that. A lot of the students that I support need personal care attendants or classroom assistants. So as Kristen mentioned, Medicaid it's a federal program, and each state administers their own Medicaid services, usually through their Health and Human Services Department in the state. But that typically means that if the student wants to take advantage of their Medicaid waiver in their home state where they reside, they usually have to stay in that state and not go out of state to school. Although there are some examples of students who are able to use their Medicaid waivers in other states. For example, I'm doing a webinar series right now highlighting the experiences of students with physical disabilities who have personal care attendants at college. And in our first part of the series, we had a student who shared his experience. He's from Wisconsin and he goes to University of Notre Dame in Indiana, and he's on a Medicaid waiver in Wisconsin, which allows him to use his Medicaid waiver out of state in Indiana. Sometimes states have reciprocity agreements that might not be easily easy to find on the internet or when you're looking, but when you talk to your state's Medicaid administrator or you work through you keep asking the questions, pulling the levers, escalating the issue. Sometimes families that I've worked with have been able to have their Medicaid work in that other state. Um,
Well, I
so,
had no idea that you
I
could do.
mean, I mean, they're not perfect examples and they're out there, but we don't talk about it enough. And this is an issue too, where it's like you and I both know, millions of people use Medicaid, for health insurance, either low-income people and people with disabilities. It's been in the news a lot recently because, of the president's budget bill, which cuts Medicaid benefits for people. And one of the challenges that many of the students that I work with now have is understanding how that will impact them and their ability to go to school, maintain care, all of these pieces. And I'm sure a lot of families are feeling confused about what's going to happen as well, in the home. So that is something that students and families will have to consider as they're thinking about their steps, whether it's, going away to college in another state, staying in state, what that's actually going to look like for that student. But I have students who use SSI money too to pay for personal care supports too, if they don't have like if they aren't in need of 24/7 care, there might be just some, they might use that SSI money for that.
Hmm.
So, I'm just pointing this out. Or that could be a space too, where if somebody had an ABLE account, they might be using the funds in that ABLE account to pay a home health agency or to pay another person to support the student with some of those needs.
Absolutely. So for those of us who get stuck in details, Annie, tell us, when should they start each part of the process? When should they contact you? When should they contact the college? Like I hear from a lot of people who say, "Hey, we're going to worry about where they want to go first. Then once they're accepted, then we're going to contact the disability office." Is that what you would recommend?
I think it depends on the student and what the scenario is and what the needs are. Um, so. My general trajectory with people is like usually the end of sophomore year is when students start to tune into this process. So that's when I recommend that people start working with me. End of sophomore year, beginning of junior year is like sort of the ideal time because I find that before that, like students aren't really there yet, and they're like, oh, like who is this lady? So it's much more like based on timing, then we can have an easy entry point into thinking about it. Um, in terms of contacting schools, right? So I say the same thing that students with disabilities should approach their search just like any other student, right? What their interests are. Maybe it's the major that they're looking for. Maybe it's like the school culture vibe that they're looking for. They want Big Ten. They want an urban school. They want a, small liberal arts feel. So there's 4,500 colleges in the United States. They all have different vibes and feels, right? And so
Yes.
students should start to look at that sort of stuff first. If the student has a physical disability or a chronic health condition, they will then want to start thinking about what are my physical needs, right? For students who use wheelchairs, mobility devices, there's another layer of consideration around topography, weather, accessibility. Every school has to be technically ADA compliant, but what that looks like and feels like is hugely different from school to school, from like a historic campus to a more modern campus, to a campus that's on a hill, to a campus that's flat, right? Like there's variation between all of these things. So the student will likely have to think about what are they willing to deal with on a daily basis? And then like, in the middle of winter, do they want to have snow and ice around, or would they prefer a different climate so that they don't have to deal with that? So those are when we start to identify like what are those other considerations? For students with chronic health conditions, it might be proximity to medical care, right? Or if you need infusions or transfusions, like can you access them? Medication management pieces. So there might be some other considerations for those students too. Um, I always encourage students to connect with disability support offices prior to applying to the school. Um, because college is a big investment. I don't know, like if you're really looking at it, it's a lot of money for most of us, right? And so you want to make sure that you are getting as much information possible about the types of accommodations that you may receive, because no disability support office will tell you exactly what they will do for you, but you want as much information as possible so that you can make an informed decision, right?
Yeah.
And so I work with students to actually help them figure out what questions are we asking in advance, and how are we doing that outreach.
Hmm.
Um, disability support offices really vary too. They might have one person who's operating by themselves and has over 1,000 students. They might have, many, many people. They might have specific people who work with students with specific conditions. So it's
Right.
very different. And so if you wait till you're accepted, you run the risk of not being able to fully vet the school because
Mhm.
sometimes you don't get a decision until March and you have till May 1st. So they're on
Not much
spring
time.
break, you're on spring break, like
Yeah.
there's not much time to figure it out. And housing accommodations are usually the first part that comes up. And students might have to request a housing accommodation by May 1st in order to get the housing that they, request the housing that they think they might need to
Mhm.
accommodate their disability. So that's different at every school as well. So students really need to be prepared, and there's a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what advice do you have for parents? And I know we're just about out of time here,
hmm
but do you have advice for parents who are navigating that tough path of knowing their child's going to need support, but also knowing their child's looking for more independence, right? They're becoming an adult.
Um, Yeah, I mean, I think like my advice is that the earlier that students and families can get started working on independent living skills, right? So like we know that that student is on the verge of adulthood, right? And so we need to start working on those adulting skills. And so identifying like where are the easy entry points that we can allow that student to have a little leeway. And as a parent, and I'm a parent too, figuring out like how can I lengthen the leash a little bit so that I can allow my student to have the independence that they want. Sometimes that might be letting the student maybe after their junior year of high school do a summer college program where they're doing a week or two at a university um, to get their feet wet, to figure out like what it feels like and what it looks like, so it's an easy entry point.
Hmm.
Um, it could be something like that. It could also just be like allowing a student to do things a little bit more independently in your neighborhood, right? So, there might be some considerations for that as well. But I think like the earlier that families can start having open conversations about this stuff, the better off everybody's going to be.
Yep. Yep.
Kristen, do you have any like final tips for families like as they're thinking about college stuff? Are there like points in time or considerations around that students and families should be thinking about as they're going into adulthood?
The biggest tip I would leave them with is even if they think their child is not going to need it today, connect with Social Security and get that disability determination by Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be needed today, it may not be needed tomorrow, but if they need services later on in adulthood, this will be really important that they took that step. It's 10 times more difficult to do it 10 years down the road.
Mm-hmm. So true. I agree.
Uh,
100%.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this
Um,
chit chat.
yeah, thank you. This was a blast.
And if people want to connect with me, you can find me at accessiblecollege.com. I'm on Facebook at Accessible College. I'm on Instagram at Accessible College. I also have a Facebook group called College Success, Physical Disabilities, Chronic Health, and Mental Health. You can find it if you go to the Accessible College Facebook page too. It's right pinned up right up at the top. Kristen, how can people find you?
So our website is the best place to start, allneedsplanning.com. You can follow me on Instagram, Diary of a Disability Mom. We have a YouTube channel, which is where I'm going to post this, and of course, a Facebook group, Special Needs Planning with the All Needs community. So a lot of different ways to connect with us and Annie. So please do.
Thanks, Kristen.
All right. Thank you.